Recording. All right. Hi, everyone. This is the September 27th meeting of the API Machinery SIG. We already worked out the agenda, so let's get started. We're a couple minutes late. David, do you want to say anything? Do you want to kick us off with the Vault KMS provider?
Sure. So last release, we introduced a KMS provider for GCE, went through, built a plugin registry. We are registering the GCE provider there. There was interest in SIG Auth to create one for Vault. It would be a non-cloud provider option. They have a proposal. The proposal looks pretty good to SIG Auth.
You totally broke up there, David.
Hopefully. Can anyone hear us?
And now we're talking about where to actually put that second provider.
I can hear you,
Great.
David.
Well, then that's embarrassing in recording, but we'll keep moving.
And I can hear you too, so it's
so we're talking about where to wait. Where did Daniel go? Well, we're talking.
We can hear you.
Okay, we're talking about where to put it. I think that Daniel and I spoke briefly. He doesn't want an API server for the dependency reasons. That seems reasonable. But KSIO Kubernetes plugins would be a reasonable spot to put it. It would give us practice with another significant KMS provider, and then from there we can see about making an actual remotable interface.
Yeah, I mean, so can you hear us now? I turned off our video. Yeah, I sort of understand the idea of getting two concrete things in before we make something a generic interface. I'm not very happy about taking another huge chunk of dependencies in the main tree. I can sort of live with it if they're not dependencies of the generic API server library. Yeah. And especially if David, if you or you have someone who can review it, like, and that's good. I guess I can live with it.
Yeah, KK has been responsive. He actually has a pull open to correspond with it, but we held it out for 1.8 because it was too late.
I would like some agreement that we're not going to let a third one in and take in another huge dependency tree. Like we got to people. Yeah. People that want to take on huge, we've got to get to a state where people who want to add huge chunks of compile time dependencies need to be able to do it out of tree.
Yes. I agree. I just think that we're going to learn a lot from having a second implementation.
Yeah. We should maybe talk next week about how we might get to that spot. Like, what are possible strategies for moving this out of tree?
Yeah. So
second API server.
No, I don't think we need to add a boundary there. I think we can add a gRPC or some other sort of API surface layer between the existing API server and the storage backend. Yeah, I think the API, as I understand it, the API between API server and the encryption provider is actually really tiny.
We can abstract that.
So I think we can abstract that. And I chatted about this with, it looks like Jacob's on the call. I chatted about this with Jacob when I was in Seattle yesterday and the day before. So, yeah, maybe we'll be able to get a design for that this quarter or in Q4. I'm not sure.
Yeah. All right. So I'll steer him toward KSIO Kubernetes and help shepherd him through what comes after. And yes, once we have this, unless something unexpected comes up, I can see making a remotable interface next.
Yeah, it's never fun to tell somebody, no, sorry, we pre-approved blocking the next person. So it would be good to have some sort of design in place before the third person shows up.
Sure.
Okay, and speaking of remotable interfaces, let's go on to the extension API, the storage thing that we discussed last week. I started putting together something more concrete, and it turns out that a new storage API would be pretty involved. So I came to the conclusion that the most practical thing to tell people right now is either deploy an etcd cluster, deploy your own etcd cluster, or sweet talk your system administrator into letting you use the main cluster's etcd. If I were the system administrator, you wouldn't be convincing me, but maybe some system administrators would allow that. But yeah, and I've got a nice little, well, nice is subjective. I've got a diagram that shows like sort of how you might arrange your extension. And the third option, so the second option, which I've put here as not recommended, is implement it in terms of CRD. I integrated some comments from David here as to why that's not a great idea. There's two basic reasons. One is that when we do come up with another storage interface, there's no guarantees that we're going to have a pre-canned migration path for your custom CRD implementation. The other reason is that CRDs are kind of their own resources with their own initializers and finalizers. And if you implement your API and then you go ahead and write to the CRD, there's like 2 places for people to put initializers, 2 places for finalizers. The garbage collector won't understand that those are actually kind of the same object. Basically, you're going to have weird problems. And people could write directly to the CRD and bypass any custom validation that you did. Yeah, so you lose the type safety that you're supposedly gaining by having an extension API server. So on option 3, which due to comments by Clayton, I have emphasized that it is not going to show up anytime soon, is to just wait for us to get around to building a storage API. And I've listed out some requirements here. Some of these are from me, some of these are from Brian.
Hey, Dan, it still looks too hopeful. I don't know like how we want to, imagine people on the internet who see something amazing in magic and they want amazing magicness.
Mm-hmm.
I think it still looks like we're going to give them amazing magicness at some point. Like,
okay, how can I like?
Well, so if I just look at the first sentence, Daniel,
yeah,
it will be multiple quarters before it happens. I think it would be better if it would said it will be multiple quarters before it begins.
Okay.
Or to switch the order of the statement, it is not currently staffed. If staffed, it could take multiple quarters to do.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah. I also would not.
Sure.
I wouldn't actually list what you think the features of the bright and glorious future would be. Simply say
that's what comes next.
Yeah, don't list that.
Oh, don't list it?
Do not tell them what you cannot, like,
Well,
first you say you're never going to get this,
So-
and then you list the amazing things you could do.
So
Just
part
don't
of
tell them.
part of the point of this is if somebody comes along and wants to like add an additional storage implementation,
Yeah.
I want to have some recorded policy of the SIG, like what we would want out of that.
I would put it in another document to deter them from continuing.
Another way would be like, we believe there's a number of problems that need to be solved, but there's a bunch of problems that we want to solve. We haven't yet determined whether it's worth it to go solve them all together. Because I kind of read this as like, I think, yes, it would be awesome if we had this magical storage layer, but my like practical thing would be, I bet we'll spend the next 2 years doing very pragmatic stuff that moves small things forward across the whole platform.
I wanted to kind of put a goalpost out there as like, as we're doing small pragmatic things, I would like us to do small pragmatic things in this direction so we end up in a place that we like.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And as Daniel pointed out, the other goal was to make sure that other folks who haven't been part of this conversation don't go riding off over hilltops, tilting at windmills without direction and come back with a big PR. And then we say, oh, wait. I think there's value in it to show the future vision, even though there's no effort going into it.
Another question that I didn't add on the doc would be like, which of these things should be things that we suggest people to add to etcd? Which, in a sense, like, even though we want these things, like, do we really care that these are in another storage system that isn't something like etcd?
So I'm totally fine with saying like we're going to put more effort in etcd and I mean honestly, a bunch of these things are actually possible in etcd3, and we just haven't done it because we're kind of waffling about whether we want to preserve the possibility of sending to other storage backends. So I want to kind of close that conversation and just be like, we're going to stick with etcd3. We're going to implement some of these. If we choose to implement some of these features, we're not going to worry about about preserving compatibility.
I think that the most important sentence in this third section is actually at the very bottom. We are interested in effort spent on making the existing storage interface cross process boundaries, as long as there's a path towards what we want in the things you listed above. I think that's the most important thing, right? Like, we aren't going to take anything else in tree to target a different vendor. That's fine. I agree with that. That makes sense. But someone who wants to come in and spend the time to try to make the existing storage interface cross process boundaries.
I don't even know if I agree with that, because I think we will need to change the existing interface to add like I don't know, indexing support.
I think that changing the interface does not mean that the effort spent in seeing what it takes to make what we have remotable, it doesn't make that effort less.
So let me tell you why I'm resistant here. Like, imagine somebody does go ahead and make it remotable. That sort of sets in stone an API that we can't really change.
If we have them properly set up detection for feature flags and versioning, then all that looks like is your storage doesn't support this. Anything that they might make, we would be able to classify as alpha very reasonably for 3 quarters. Easy, right? I mean, like, proving out that it works is valuable. We have a way to test it.
But
I think makes me really nervous from the conformance perspective. As the conformance tests sort of get built out, that ends up making that conversation more difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and some of this is like if we turn this discussion around, which is somebody doesn't like etcd and they want to go to a different data store. There's really 2 reasons to do that. One, you believe you actually have a better data store than etcd at a particular scale factor, which, while reasonable, is not true for the vast majority of clusters that will ever exist. And the other one is and I feel like this is kind of a harsh statement, but like you really want your thing to work with Cube, but that doesn't make Cube better. That makes your life easier, right? Like Cube running on top of console wouldn't actually make console better. It would make console worse, because now you need 2 separate console clusters to tolerate, X, Y, and Z. The more that we can try to make the discussion in terms of like, we just want to make the current Cube better, and etcd is part of the implementation, I think the more flexibility we have to make Cube better.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think people in your second bucket, I'm not interested in having them make our lives harder by putting their code in our code base. People in your first bucket, I would honestly rather see that effort go into helping etcd scale.
Yeah, and like, I don't see anything in etcd3 except a few of the details where like, sure, Cockroach DB down the road might be able to do it better, or Spanner could do it better, or Dynamo could do it better. Doing it better isn't a good enough reason to basically cut one of the legs off of SIG API Machinery and preserving its flexibility to make what we have now work much, much better.
So can we articulate that in some positional statement? We value consistency over exploration of potential improvements in some areas, or something like that.
Yeah, I think that statement coming from the SIG and backed up by SIG architecture means that like it's kind of a hard line, but it's a reasonable hard line that we can defend.
And of course, if someone wants to mount a big campaign and make a pitch and make a proposal and get alignment, that is possible. But at least it stops the never-ending stream of small conversations until that day.
Yeah.
So, David, can you live with that?
I think it's going to come down to exactly how it's phrased. I can definitely agree with the phrasing in this doc in that last paragraph. Were we to change it and say we weren't interested in trying to tune or tweak our storage interface, that sounds a lot like calcification and saying, I don't think there's a better way. This is good enough. It does exactly what I want.
I don't think we're interested in calcifying on our exact storage interface. It's more that we want the option to evolve it in the directions that we want to evolve it in.
Yeah.
To make Qt better versus.
I guess as long as this doesn't turn into a bludgeon to stop people from improving what we have, then.
Well, in fact, I think we're viewing it as the opposite. We're feeling like we want the freedom to actually improve it, and we feel like, to some degree, the idea of, well, we can't change it because then it'll be difficult for other storage systems is the
I did not see that as what we would end up with. I also do not want to get into a spot where it'll be hard because somebody else already written this. I don't care.
So think of this as a bludgeon to stop people from going in directions we don't want to go.
Or as to dissuade them from investing large amounts of effort on things that don't actually make Qt better.
Yeah. So, like I said, this phrasing, yes, I can agree to this phrasing.
And the idea of putting this in a doc and having a position is so that it's clear to people from the get-go that if they want to go in this direction, they really need to start with a proposal and are going to have to work hard to get people on board. Like, rather than assuming that it'll be easy and going out and doing a bunch of work.
Well, I think a palatable way to phrase this is to say that for now at least, we feel like where we want to invest our limited resources is on making the implementation we have better, rather than on making it possible to put other implementations in place. Like, what we're really focused on here is like a different backend would just be different storage problems we don't have today.
Yeah.
Like, let's focus instead on fixing the backend.
So can we get more concrete and say something along the lines of any future storage would have to be wholesale replacement, not abstraction, something like that?
I still don't know that I would go that far as wholesale replacement, right? So if Daniel comes to me in another quarter or two and says, hey, I'm ready to make blob storage, I don't want to have to point at this doc and say, sorry, we're not doing that. I want to be able to say, yeah, okay, so this is the path forward to doing that.
That's the point of this talk is so that we can go that direction.
I think what Jacob was saying was we're not interested in Kubernetes that plugs into n different storage backends. Like, the pluggability isn't the issue. We want there to be a single component that we can put our effort on and make it reliable and performant. So it's not so much that blob storage is not okay, but if we wish to etcd out.
Well, blob storage is the first example of the next one you want.
It's about pulling etcd out, right? It's about saying, here's the thing, it's the new thing. That would be what we'd be looking for in order to move on down here.
I think swapping out etcd is not very much like swapping out some of the other plugins that we have. It's not like swapping out the cloud provider. It's not like swapping out the container runtime. It's like you don't really get benefit from swapping out etcd and do gain a large test matrix.
Yes, you do.
There's a staffing issue to this as well. So we've got a full-time engineer and about half time of a couple other engineers working on etcd. We're looking to add to that team. And I think this makes sense as long as etcd is the answer for the foreseeable future. If it's one of many, then this becomes a non-scalable organizational issue. CoreOS is looking for more contributors to etcd. We'd like to invest in that. So to me, that makes sense as long as etcd is the one storage solution for Kubernetes. Like, from my perspective, I'd love to see etcd as part of the Kubernetes project. And that would make it more clear from outside, I think, that its intention is to be the storage solution for Kubernetes. What I want to avoid is having to test and maintain and figure out bugs for API server as it writes to multiple storage solutions and try and span multiple cloud providers and multiple storage solutions and on-prem and in the cloud. And then we can't really staff for that critical component.
Yeah. All I'm saying is that when you pitch the next one that you want, expect this to come back up. But yeah, this phrasing is fine for now.
Okay, I'm just trying to give more context and keep the conversation going. If someone else has a different way of looking at it, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think this document is like a 1 to 2 year policy. I don't think it's like forever policy.
Sure. I mean, anything more than that is sort of disingenuous, right? Who knows what'll.
And that's at least 4 releases before we would start entertaining proposals. So if something changes, we'll know, but we have no evidence that anything's going to change in our current approach.
Okay, so to sort of make progress, are we happy enough with this document to just be done with it, or do we want to make changes and go for a third round?
I'll add some comments about like the wording of like the positional statement. I think we should iterate it just a little bit more and then say like, here's our position statement on a backend databases for all these reasons, and here's what we recommend for these specific tactical problems that we know people have right now. And if you have new tactical problems, bring them up with a SIG. And if you want to go rewrite the backend, here's the kind of criteria, and here's why we don't think that's going to happen. And here's a useful channel for you to. Like, I don't want to say, no, you cannot propose something, but we want to say, like, before you propose something, like, understand these points. And that's probably just, that either that's this doc or another doc. I think this doc is a good place to do it so that people don't take that third bullet as suggesting.
Okay, so how about we do this? How about we approve this provisional on me integrating whatever comments Clayton comes up with?
Yeah, that's fine.
That make anybody unhappy?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. I'm going to actually say that. Okay. And the last item on the list, and possibly the most contentious, we'll see. Hopefully it won't be. Okay, Clayton says he has to drop. Bye-bye. Webhook needs to support mutation. Okay, well. It's too bad you have to go. What are the webhook and initializer requirements to get to beta in 1.9? We are super interested in getting to beta in 1.9. I would rather agree on like concrete requirements. I have a list which unfortunately I haven't put into a public doc yet. I don't know. One thing I haven't heard is requirements about the webhook. So if anyone here has, I've been trying to find somebody who's actually attempted to use the webhook, and I haven't succeeded yet. Maybe one thing that we could do usefully here is decide the criteria by which we'll decide what's required for beta.
The criteria for criteria.
Yeah. I'm going to maintain that for beta, it needs to solve somebody's use case, and it needs to not break anything. Like it shouldn't destabilize clusters.
I think that we also are going to need to have a path forward. You should at least be able to see how you get from where you are in beta to something where, if we wanted to, we could actually rewrite our admission chain in terms of the extension points that we're adding. So I can give a concrete example. Something like PSP is a challenge. Right, PSP is an admission plugin that does both defaulting and validating. And as things get mutated in the chain, PSP, if it runs too early, can be invalidated. And so as it stands now, we actually do destabilize clusters by turning on initializers. That's a poor outcome.
You're saying the current built-in PSP admission controller runs, a initializer runs, which can invalidate the pod security policy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, at least in one of the intervening levels. I haven't gone back and checked exactly what we locked down in terms of immutable fields in pods after they got relocked. But in concept, yes. And you can envision writing other admission plugins that would face similar problems, say a webhook admission plugin that was trying to validate a field that got reset during a mutation.
So, tell me why can't pod security policy provide a webhook that does the validation?
Webhooks don't run after initializers.
They should. They should run on every update, even the updates that initializers do.
So you end up with things that are valid to do on. So it gets called as an update mode, not as a create mode. And I guess different logic is often applied for updates than it is for creates.
But you can tell by looking at the object whether it's an update to an uninitialized object or an update to an initialized object.
So I guess that's the criterion, is that it is
Okay, so maybe
possible to do.
Like the criteria is in my mind, like I should be able to see how I would write our existing plugins as a combination of initializers.
Okay, that sounds like something that can be solved with documentation, and it sounds like something that needs documentation. If like you hadn't realized how to do that.
Yeah, if anybody in like the core group,
If it wasn't
API
obvious
machinery,
to if it wasn't obvious to you, then it's not going to be obvious to anybody. So we need to document that really well.
But so in concept, there is, we have problems like that where you end up limited, I think, by what we have. So if we can get to a point where we can actually describe, this is how you would write all of our admission plugins as initializers, or if we can't write them, or webhooks. But if we can't write them in that mode, then I don't think that we can. If we can't write them in that mode and we can't describe how in 3 months you will be able to, because we'll be able to fix it in a certain way, then I don't think we can call it beta.
In this list,
There was a discussion about some possible.
Is someone talking?
Everybody's talking, but we can't hear you.
sorry, can you hear me now?
No, not really.
Okay, I'll type it.
I think some of the issues around this might be ordering issues, being able to definitively specify an order that things run in, and resolving some of the questions around like parallelism or mutation order. So some of it may be possible today and just isn't spec'd. So just verifying that and making sure it is spec'd.
So I'm actually going to argue that parallelism and implementing a graph, like a dependency graph, we should do after beta.
I don't think you can rewrite our current admission chain without that.
I think you can. I think you can do the checking in webhooks, and you can do the mutations and initializers.
Mutation happens in updates as well, and initializers don't do anything on updates.
I'm sorry, Jordan?
Mutation happens on update as well, and initializers don't have any ability to mutate things on update.
Yes, you wouldn't be able to mutate on updates, but I think we can. I'm hoping we can go to beta without that.
I don't think so. I mean, that's the describe what we currently have in terms of the extension points.
I mean, we're not going to implement the stuff that we currently have in the code that we right. We're not going to move the ones that we have in Q4.
We aren't, but what we have is a fair sampling to at least start from and say, if we can't do this, we haven't successfully externalized admission.
I mean, yeah, I'm not convinced that we have to do everything. I think we should solve some use cases and make that stable, and that is useful for people, right? That's a deliverable that people can run out and build things with.
Well, the thing is that we have a known set of, here's a bunch of useful things. This is the chain that we like. This is the chain that we can build. And if we don't have a way to say this is how you do that externally, then it really doesn't feel like a solution. It feels like maybe someday it'll be a solution. And I'm not saying we shouldn't keep trying to improve. I'm just saying I'm hard pressed to call it beta.
I mean, where is the line? Where is the line between like alpha and beta?
Well, I think there's some sense in which you believe. I think there's a sense in which you believe that you could turn this on for anybody who wanted to use it, and they're really just like a beta tester. Like, sure, we might have missed something, but basically, we think this is a thing.
Yeah, I think beta, we want the design to be fleshed out enough that we can see the use cases we care about being satisfied by the design. And there's always, V2, V3, whatever, like future additional things. I'm not talking about boiling the ocean. I'm talking about the use cases that we have today for admission should be part of that design. Like you should be able to express it in terms of this externalized admission.
I think that's a really high bar, right? Like we're not going to roll over all of our existing admission controllers onto this, like the instant it's available. We're going to have some transitional state. So
I'm not saying that we would. I'm saying we should be able to describe an implementation, how you would implement that. Otherwise, one of the main goals, which is to stop adding in-tree admission plugins, we're gonna be hard pressed, right? Like someone's gonna come and say, well, I want to do this thing, and it doesn't work for these reasons because order isn't satisfied, or
we got this to beta and it serviced some but not all use cases, then that means some but not all admission controllers could go out of tree.
And I think David's point was we don't even necessarily have to have it fully implemented, but we should know the gaps and know the changes that would be required to satisfy those gaps in pretty good detail, so that we can say the API that we're declaring beta and supporting going forward, we have a path to supporting these additional.
Yeah, I think before it goes GA, we need to add parallelism. We need to add a dependency graph, and we need to add mutation on updates via webhooks. I think that's a given before it is a finished feature. But I think we can go to beta lacking those.
I want a high degree
of people's use case. And Walter really wants to say something now.
Yeah, I was going to say, if what I'm hearing, and I think actually we're pretty close to saying the same thing, is basically some people are saying, look, I would like to understand what we can do, and if that set of can-dos is enough, then we're good. Maybe what we need to do is just pull back a bit, take a quick look at our existing sets, see which ones we think we can, not actually implement them, but just make a convincing argument that this set of admission plugins we can express this way. Here's the design on how we would do it, and then come back and say, hey, look, this is the class of problems we can solve, and maybe at that point they'd be a lot more comfortable. Is that right, guys?
There's an additional piece, which is the set that we can't solve, we should understand why we can't, and understand what changes would be required to get there, just so we don't release a beta version that has fundamental flaws that would prevent us from covering that last 20% of use cases.
But, so what I'm hearing is not that what we have isn't sufficient. It's, I think what I'm hearing is what we have, we don't yet know if it's sufficient. And you'd just like to have a better idea of whether it's sufficient for beta or not.
Well, we know that what we have isn't sufficient to represent our chain. We don't have.
We all agree with that.
We don't have a crisp list of precisely what is missing. And before we go to beta, I want not just a crisp list. I want to have a fairly concrete and detailed design describing how we intend to get there, so that we can be sure that anything we call beta doesn't box us out of actually fixing the problems that we need to address. So it's not just identifying what gaps we have to overcome, it is actually designing those pieces.
So
to make them all fit.
And this is responding to something Jago chatted out, which is the API should be stable. Like, we can change APIs. It takes a couple of quarters, but we can change APIs. So, like, even if we get it wrong.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Just wanted to chime in with a couple other thoughts. There's a cost to not bringing it to beta, in that what exists today is already useful to other projects like Istio and Service Catalog, which are both open source projects trying to use initializers, which is our recommended path for doing this. And not bringing it to beta is inspiring some creative workarounds that we'll have to deal with in the future as well.
Yeah, right now.
Don't get us wrong. We all really want it to be beta.
So I was just expressing that there is a real world solution in what exists today for some use cases. And second, I was going to say, I think articulating the goal as we need to imagine every use case and have a clear, concrete design is maybe too high a goal. We should have, I think, a solid design. And then I think the onus shifts in some way to poke holes in the design and come up with counterexamples for which the design is not sufficient.
Okay. I mean, that's what we're discussing. We're not imagining every use case. We have a set of existing use cases for admission. So I agree. We shouldn't sit around coming up with new, as yet unbuilt. I mean, maybe we could, but I think we have enough to work with. We're talking about the existing admission use cases.
Let me phrase it this way. Right now, 0% of the admission controllers can be out of tree. I would like that to be a non-0% in 1.9. I don't want that to be, I don't need that to be 100%, but it needs to be more than 0%.
I don't disagree.
Very much like that. I think that taking the time to say, okay, this is what we have today. We know that these are valid use cases. How would we satisfy them? Let me design the pieces and see where everything lands is just a matter of due diligence before calling what you have beta. Right? I'm not saying that you have to go implement all those pieces, but what I am saying is that you need to have a concrete design for how you would. Otherwise, you can make choices in an API that are
this is code, right? We can change the API. If we get it wrong, we can change it.
No, I'm sorry. I'm on the other side of this. And that's not true, and that's not really what the rules about our APIs tell us. We don't have arbitrary freedom to change it all the time, and beta does mean something like that.
There's a deprecation period, but
right. But let's be honest with ourselves and the people we tell that it's beta to. I totally get where Jago's coming from, and that we're kind of like encouraging people to do some workarounds that may be unpleasant if we don't get to beta quickly. That said, let's be honest about whether or not we can call this beta. We should not call it beta if we have real world use cases that we know we would want to use, other people would want to use, and we say we're actually not sure how we would do that. That's not good. I agree. I don't know if that came through on the Zoom. I'm kind of far away from Daniel.
It did. It sounded like he was trying to express the same thing I was trying to express.
Yeah, I don't feel like we're being honest with you.
Yeah, that's Matt speaking, by the way.
MML, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm biased towards providing people something that works and solves a problem as fast as possible. Like that's how we have done things in this project historically, at the expense of incurring a lot more technical debt than I would be comfortable with. But this is an extension feature which allows people to get the technical debt into their own repositories rather than in tree. So I'm willing to incur additional technical debt.
Well, I think that's a mistake. It seems like due diligence says finish your design with known use cases before you declare the API is stable.
So let's work to that. How can we staff that effort and get consensus? Because we went to alpha in 1.7. We had a goal of getting initializers at least to beta in 1.8, and it didn't happen. And now it looks quite risky to me for 1.9. So at this point, actually, folks can't do either. They can't get it in tree because we won't accept it, and they can't get it out of tree because it doesn't work yet.
I think that the path forward is to design the missing pieces. Like I said, I'm not even requiring that they all be built, but to at least be able to describe what needs to be there and how we would design it to work.
Okay, so how can we collaborate on this? This was Clayton's proposal initially, right? We put a lot of effort into it already. How can we work together to collaborate on that design? David, can you help with that? Is that something
I can. I am trying to think of who I know on your side that is actively working on. I know Chow is.
Yes.
From our side, we can find someone. A couple names come to mind. I'm going to have to talk to them before I voluntold them.
Sure.
Yeah, we're planning on having more of the team work on this here too. So.
But I do see that as a blocker for beta. But yes, we will find someone to help and help work through those design challenges. But I don't want to call it beta if we don't get it to that state.
One question: do we need to get to initializer and webhook both to beta at the same time period? Because I think we know there are some problems that can only be solved by webhook. For example, only webhook can handle mutation updates.
It's very difficult to hear what's being said. Sorry.
Chow is asking if both need to go to beta at the same time.
I'm asking if both initializer and webhook needs to go to beta at the same time. Because I'm thinking some of the problems can only be solved by webhooks, like how can we handle mutation during updates? That initializer cannot solve that. So developing on David's argument, I'm trying to say can we claim initializer is beta without designing how the webhook can do mutation? Because I think there are two distinctive pieces. And I'm pretty sure, I think we have a better idea of what's missing in initializer than what's missing in webhook.
I don't see a reason to require them to go to beta together.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of use cases that actually need both a mutation and a checking piece.
Well, I think that webhook admission webhooks need to be able to mutate.
Yeah, I think they each have their own gaps today. I think that there are use cases where that would be solved by just one or just the other. There might be some that require both, but if we can isolate requirements and build one out to beta, that could be useful.
It's better than nothing. Has anyone on your side been tasked with like requirements gathering for this?
I am in the process of actually trying to use an admission webhook.
Okay.
That experience is, in theory, going to drive out some. Although it could be perfect, who knows?
Okay, I was working on requirements gathering. It looks like I'm not going to complete that before I go on vacation, so I'm going to find someone here to continue that. Yeah, and I'll make sure that they work with you or your delegate. But it sounds like we don't have requirements.
Being able, just saying in a broad sense, we need to be able to describe our current admission chain in terms of extensible pieces of admission is actually fairly broad and gives you and drives most of the requirements. I don't want to have imaginary requirements. Things like I can imagine someone writing a different admission plugin that does this. And that's interesting, but we have
I think you're describing the maximal set of requirements, and I'm trying to claim that the actual set of requirements to get to beta is a little bit smaller than that.
Yeah. So slightly reversing myself as I've been sitting here. I think that what the essential disagreement might be about is essentially what the definition of the product is in the first place. Is it supposed to be able to support the externalization of all parts of admission, or is it just supposed to be better than today, better than yesterday? And
well, our position going forward is that this is going to be, like, we're not going to add more entry ones. And so if that's the goal, then I would expect it to be able to handle all parts of admission.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I think as a path forward, we'll be finding someone to work on requirements from our side, and we'll have to coordinate with David or Jordan or whoever you want. But I'm going to argue, and I think whoever is here while I'm on vacation is going to argue that implementing completely all of the current admission chain is more than necessary for beta. Like, we shouldn't build something that we know has no chance of working.
Right. I mean, you'll notice that, like, we've been talking about having a concrete design for how you would address the gaps that you have. I'm not trying to claim that we need to have a concrete implementation for all of those gaps.
Yeah, even concrete design is stronger than I would say. Like, I think we should have some idea about how we're going to do it. I don't think we need a fully approved, completely specified design doc.
I think experience shows that having some idea and then starting implementation or declaring an API stable usually leaves us with an API that proves insufficient.
And, like, we can deprecate the beta API and have a V1 API.
I mean, if you want to encourage people to use an API that we don't have a lot of confidence in being supported long term, they can already do that with the alpha API.
No, a lot of people can't.
So that's not.
Well, then that seems like a false confidence. If the point is they can't use alpha because there are policies that prohibit enabling alpha APIs because they're not stable, so let's declare it beta so it can be quote unquote stable, but we're not really any more confident that it's going to be actually stable. That seems disingenuous.
On a more practical note, to agree with the, I don't want to get to the point where the rules change from those same people to where they're told they can't use beta either, because we gain a reputation for not honoring our beta and like throwing away the API after 3 quarters.
If we were to go to beta, like, we have a documented deprecation policy, that means we'd have to live with the API for an extra couple quarters. And we would support it for a couple quarters if you use something that's beta. Like, even if we think that we're not going to be changing it, if you use something that's beta, you're taking the risk that the deprecation policy is going to happen 1 quarter sooner than it would if we had gone to V1. I mean, but that's all it is. Like, the deprecation policy is now like 1 quarter extra that you get with V1 than you would get with beta. So
just a time check and a quick proposal. It's about 5 of. Just to close out on this, I'd like to propose that we staff it. We come back in 2 weeks and time box it and say, this is as far as we got in the document. How far off is this from the level of design detail that folks are comfortable with? And it may be super far off and it may be not, but I think there's a lot of speculation going on, and I think this is the best next step.
In my opinion, it is not something that we time box for coming up with a concrete design.
I'm not saying that you will agree that it is a concrete design. What I'm saying is, let's staff it and come up with a document, and in 2 weeks you can give feedback whether you believe that is a concrete design or not.
Sure.
Without that, I'm speculating as to what you mean by concrete design, and there's no specificity around what that means.
Okay. Yeah, I have no issue with making progress on this, which I think is what you're proposing. Making progress makes sense. I'm just not going to agree in advance that 2 weeks was long enough. So
I totally agree. We've all agreed that some level of information above what exists today is required, and we're just nitpicking over how much is required, and I don't think we're getting anywhere in this conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Let's break for the day, and we'll reevaluate in a couple of weeks.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye, guys.